So I'm gonna fire some questions at Max. Please feel free to get involved. Put your hand up. Max will probably pick you up. The crowd, just have a chat. I'll run through a few things. We'll go over his story. It'll be about 40 minutes, and at the end we'll do a 10 or 15 minutes Q&A where everyone can just get involved and hound Max with questions. All right, but look, let's go back to the very beginning. To when you came to the UK. I think you came to university here. Give us your story of, up until when you started Finimize.
Cool.
Go for it.
Cool, yeah, thanks for having me. So as Ed was saying, my name is Max. I'm originally from Berlin, but I always like to say I left when the city started getting cool, because I graduated from high school, and then sort of studied here in the UK for 3 years, and in the US, actually in Charlottesville, now everybody knows it, for a year. And then sort of really randomly ended up in Switzerland, where with a couple of friends we started a company called Dein Deal, which essentially means your deal in German. And we sort of started it off as a very sort of niche e-commerce platform, and then that grew really, really quickly. So within like 4 to 5 years, we were the second largest e-commerce platform within Switzerland. So we had like 25% of all households were shopping with us roughly, and we had a higher brand awareness than British Airways, which was like our favorite stat. And ultimately we were like a pretty big fish in a small but very, very wealthy pond. And at the end of 2015, essentially sold the company to the largest media house in Switzerland called Ringier. And then I basically came to London.
And then, how did you start Finimize? Let's go up to the problem that led up to
Okay.
Finimize. What caused
So
basically move from e-commerce?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the thing with e-commerce was like, I never really set out like, hey, I want to do e-commerce. It was more like I wanted to sort of get in, stay in the online world, and then like that thing came up. We can talk about that if that's of interest. And essentially, sort of while I was living in Switzerland, I started sort of encountering this problem that then led me to start Finimize, which was kind of a very simple problem actually. What happened was that everybody around me, sort of my parents, the media, like everybody was like, hey, you're in your mid-late 20s now, you got to start saving some money. And so I kind of took that to heart, and one day just started, setting up like a direct debit, I think, from my salary onto my savings account, and started saving every month. And then kind of like one day just took out my phone, like opened my bank account, and I realized, awesome, like I have some savings now. It wasn't life-changing or anything, but it was like the amount where you would start thinking about what you want to do with it. And then I kind of embarrassingly, even though I studied economics, I had to admit to myself that I had no clue what to do with these savings. And so I just left them on my savings account in cash. And then I started like asking friends, like, hey, what do you guys do? And a lot of them were bankers here in the city. And I very quickly realized that when it came to their personal finances, they were also very clueless. Like they could do really complex M&A deals, but like they couldn't do sort of a very basic financial plan because we were never taught. And then I basically went to go seek professional advice, went to go speak just to sort of my bank around the corner, because I couldn't afford to go to a financial advisor at the time. And basically all that banker did was ask me a bunch of like super generic questions, probably something that she had been sort of handed to her in a questionnaire catalog that morning, and ultimately sort of laid out all of the pamphlets from their bank's products onto the table. And I was like, okay, well, there's like other stuff that I could probably do as well. And they essentially was a sales pitch for their own products. And then pretty frustrated by that experience, went online, and I just couldn't find anything that would provide me with really independent, holistic financial advice. And that's when I started realizing, okay, I'm probably not the only buddy who has some savings and doesn't know what to do with them. Started digging around a bit, realized that actually 86% of people like myself, so in their late 20s, early 30s, actually save money each month, but they keep more than 50% of those savings in cash because there isn't really a suitable way for people like that to get financial advice. And that was ultimately the genesis, I guess, of Finimize. So it's really sort of the cliche startup story, like I had a problem and then nobody was fixing it, so I went out and tried to fix it. Whether I'll be successful is yet to be seen.
We're fixing it now. So, no, thanks. So let's rewind. So we've got to the start of Finimize. So let's go back to leaving St. Andrews.
Yeah.
You made a very successful company over 4 years. Why did you go into e-commerce at the time? You seem like a guy who can do any business. Why?
No, so this was actually kind of a funny story. So I kind of was in school. As I sort of hit puberty, I kind of was turned a bit sort of on the geeky side and started like building websites and stuff like that. And spent my lunch periods building HTML websites with like Dreamweaver at the time. And I was the first kid in my school who had a website. And it had, all I did was I had this book with Bart Simpson jokes, and I just typed it, and then that was my website. And then like people thought it was really cool, and they were all like, oh, awesome, you have a website. And it was like geocities.com/whatever, like, I don't know if you guys still remember that time. Probably most of the people on my team don't, because they're too young. And so I was kind of always really interested in that, and then I kind of went to university, did economics, and then everybody's like, hey, you want to be a banker, and like, you want to maybe do consulting, and then I kind of like got distracted by that a little bit. And then I did a consulting gig for a year, and found myself just reading every day TechCrunch, and was like, oh, fuck, what am I doing here? And then I had a friend from high school who's kind of the same. We always wanted to do something. So long story short, we decided that we wanted to do a website that would allow people to customize chocolate, and so you could like choose sort of which ingredients, you could write stuff on it, and this was the only reason, because he had done an internship at a company in Berlin that did that, and so we were like, okay, we'll just do this in London. And we had found a chocolate factory, like I think in Hackney or something, like had everything set, and then I was like, I never eat chocolate. I like really don't care about chocolate. Like this is probably a bad idea to start a chocolate company. And then we're like, okay, let's do something else. He had studied in Switzerland, and so then basically a student friendship had developed with another guy who was Swiss. He was like, hey, we're going to start this e-commerce company. Then my friend was like, hey, do you want to join us? Then I basically said, okay, I kind of just want to do anything. And then moved to Switzerland, and then we started this e-commerce company. And probably one thing to add, at the time there was this big Groupon hype, and so we started off with this daily deal model, and that allowed us to like grow really, really quickly. And the thing that we did that sort of distinguished us, which is kind of why we're still alive, is that we very quickly moved away from the daily deals, and we sort of really set up our own supply chain. So that's why we were like a full-on e-commerce platform. And that's kind of how I got into e-commerce. Sort of in hindsight, actually, I think e-commerce was the best way to get started, because there's like very, very little product market fit, like none of that shit. You just like have to build a website, sell stuff, and that's it. The challenge is in the sort of detail, like, you know, estimating delivery time, like expanding your inventory. It's like all very operational. But anybody with a common sort of sense and some raw intelligence can figure that stuff out. Obviously then doing an Amazon that's like a way different game, but like it was just pure execution. And there was none of the stuff that we're doing now at Finimize where it's like, oh, what if this feature, will this help retention or whatever. It was very, very straightforward, and like, it was a great way to sort of learn the bread and butter of starting a business.
So, Bart Simpson jokes, chocolate, e-commerce, they all go together. That's the classic entrepreneur.
That's my life.
So the business itself, so you touched a little bit on slightly on the operations side. So you were a marketplace, right? Or you had warehouses that you stocked goods?
We were everything, actually. We were kind of all over the place.
How did it work? Was it an Amazon on a smaller scale, or how did you differentiate?
So, like I said, we started off with this daily deal stuff because that was just, you know, it was just exploding, and so that was an amazing way how to grow user base. And then we kind of like looked at America. Then you had all these shopping clubs. There was this thing called Guild Group. They were really big. So we're like, oh, maybe we'll just do the Guild Group for Switzerland. And I think that thinking we can touch on a little bit as well is like, there wasn't really that much of a sort of mission. We were just building a company and trying to increase revenue as fast as possible. And so we're like, oh, we'll just do then a guild. And then we're like, then guild just kind of like went bankrupt nearly in America. And we're like, okay, let's not do guild. Let's do more of like an Amazon. And then we're like, okay, let's do Amazon. And then we built our own warehouse and we started like taking inventory and we started doing consignment and we started then building a marketplace. And that was definitely the right decision because that was much more of a sustainable model. But we kind of like really morphed. And I guess like to our credit, maybe then we were very good at sort of iterating it very quickly and just sort of, I don't like to say pivot, but like sort of adjusting to the market conditions. But I think the thing that we kind of lacked was we didn't really have this like big mission that we were pursuing. It was literally like, how can we make more money? And that's a totally different ball game now with Finimize.
Okay. And then so head towards the end of sorry, dime deal. So you grew to 200 staff. You were turning over $110 million.
Mm-hmm.
How did you control this growth? How did you stop slipping up? Was it due to good hires? Was it experienced hires? Was it raising money? How did you control it?
I mean, we probably didn't control it, is the short answer. Okay. We grew probably way too fast. It's kind of the classic startup mistake that everybody sort of looks back at and is like, fuck, we need to fire 50 people, or 50% of everybody. I think we grew really, really quickly in the beginning, and we're like, anybody who can sort of come to the office will just, like, people literally were sitting on turned around beer, I don't know what the English word is, where you put beer, Bierkasten in German.
Like
I don't know, like
tray.
Beer tray.
Crates.
Yeah, beer crates. We turned around the crates, and that was like their chair. Because I think we had to like move office 3 times within a year or something, because we were like growing that fast. And then I think we sort of at some point hit this point where we were like, okay, we now need to become profitable. And then we had to sort of let go of, I don't know how many people, but like, not like massive, but like a decent amount where it started getting sort of painful. And that in itself was also a great experience, obviously. But we probably could have like preempted that. I mean, you're always smarter in hindsight. But we kind of just like went with the flow. It was much more of this model of like, we're growing so fast, how can we keep up? Rather than like, okay, this is where we want to be, this is how we're going to get there. And you also have to remember that we were based in Switzerland, which is not, at the time, certainly wasn't like a tech hub. So it was really like get people, like train them up, and then like, and a lot of them have actually started really cool companies after, which is kind of cool. Yeah.
Nice. And then, so you got to a point where you're like, right, we're selling, or we've got a buyer, or how did it come about? The actual exit, did you have that in your plan? Or did you
No.
before your exit, like, it sounds like you were just going for it from day one.
Yeah.
And then how did that come about then?
So I think it was kind of like at, we reached a point, like I said, when we had like 25% household penetration, I think was what we calculated. And at that point, like, if you haven't, like, I was in Switzerland the other day, and this like old lady at the cashier, we started chatting somehow, and she knew of Dine Deal. And it was basically like at that point, if you haven't heard of us, then you must have like lived in some like tiny remote village. Like everybody knew of us. And so at that point, if you weren't shopping with us, then it was probably like you just didn't like what we were selling, or you just didn't want it or whatever. And so we've kind of like reached that, what felt at least like a ceiling. Presumably you probably could have gone further, but it felt a bit like a ceiling. We were used to this like hyper growth. And so it was much more about like optimizing stuff, reducing costs. You know, at the end of the day, e-commerce is all about like how cheap can you get with the fulfillment costs and all of that stuff. And it wasn't really about building, it was much more about like optimizing. And I think a lot of people who start companies are more builders. I mean, you have these great guys like Jeff Bezos who can do everything, but I think the most people who are founders are more the builders rather than the optimizers. And so for us, it was like, A, we were probably not the best people to do that. B, that wasn't really what got us out of bed in the morning. And then C, we also sort of, you know, at some stage, you also have to return money to your investors. And sort of all of these things came together. And then we had a couple of offers actually. And then at one point it was like, okay, we'd recruited really good people, not sort of thinking they were going to take over, but like we'd hit a stage where we had like really senior people in the management. And I think I was the youngest guy actually in our management team. And they were like all in their like 40s or whatever, and they like had done this before. And we're like, hey, you know, if we leave now, we can train these guys up and they can take over the company, and it'll be a very smooth transition. It's not like the card house is going to collapse once we leave. And so it just felt like all the like puzzle pieces were in the right place. And then we got this offer, and we'd also been doing this for like 5 years. Like I knew that I wanted to do something else, and then at some stage you kind of got that like itch. And I think, like I said, you know, one of the lessons has really been we didn't from day one really focus on culture and mission and stuff like that. And so I think it was probably easier for us to let go than perhaps if we would have focused on that from day one. So like all these factors came together, and then, you know, what happened.
And there was someone fishing around and you just saw it.
Yeah.
Do you have an itsy-weensy little bit of share left?
No, I have zero.
Oh, what a shame. Anyway, I'm sure it's an incredible success. So he says it in a very modest way there, but a lot to learn. Now, on to Finimize. So you finished Dime Deal. You came to London. Finimize had your problem, had your pain. How did you launch Finimize from the very beginning? What was your, you know, did you take any lessons that you took from Dime Deal? Like, what was your plan of action? Let's say the first, you can break it down however you want to, 6 months, 1 year, and launch phase.
So I kind of like knew what I liked and what I didn't like. So I didn't want to build the sort of executionally focused business because I had kind of done that. I didn't really want to do the sort of very kind of like rocket internet kind of style business, and I felt like that was going on in Berlin a lot, which is obviously a massive generalization, but like I just felt for some reason like the London startup scene was a lot more creative. So I kind of knew like this is a place where I think you can build a cool startup. And then I wanted to build like a really, really mission-driven company. And going hand in hand with that, like just finding like the most amazing people who really believe in the mission and who just want to build an amazing company, not to sell, but like just to really build it. And then we kind of like went about it like very iteratively, in the sense of like we actually focused quite a long, actually like really nailing what the problem was. And a lot of people, like friends or whatever here, who I sat down with, and they really were like, okay, like, but actually, like, what problem are you trying to solve? And now I know very clearly, like, oh, I had savings, I didn't know what to do with it, and now we're going to help you do that. But when we started Finimize, like, that was not clear at all. It was kind of just like, oh, we want to explain finance. And it was more like, oh, there's a solution to sort of some problem, but we're not 100% sure what that problem was. So, like, we worked quite a lot conceptually on that. And then we kind of sat down and we're like, okay, one of the lessons actually also from Dino was at the end when we were sort of that large, we literally could sell anything. Like and the last sort of thing that I did before we left was like, we launched this sex toys category, and like everybody was like, no, Swiss people, they're too prude, they're never going to buy sex toys. And like everybody was like buying sex toys with us. And
Germans on their door.
Yeah. So we were selling furniture, we were selling sex toys, we were selling fashion, like we were selling everything. And it was because we had people's attention, and because we had that scale, that we had that sort of immediate relationship with our users. And so I knew like having that reach and that scale is going to be super, super valuable. And then, and you know, I definitely, like, as you probably most people do, I went like very naively into fintech. I mean, I went into e-commerce. I'd never been to a warehouse. I didn't even know how to calculate a gross margin. Like I knew nothing about retail. I actually thought it was the most boring thing you could probably do. And then I went into finance, and I have no finance background. Yeah? So I guess there's always some naivete going into these things. But the way we then started was like, okay, like let's build up a community first, and let's build up an audience first. And once you have that in place, then it's going to be a lot easier to start launching products. And so what we did, and we continue to do, is we were like, hey, you know, what if we just explain financial news to people? That will give us a reason to engage with them every day, and we can kind of just test the waters. And we basically put a website up on WordPress, and started writing these like finance stories. Who of you actually has heard of Finimize before, just so I have an idea? Okay, so actually a decent amount. So kind of like pretty much the same format as today, but it was just a website. So we launched it, and then like nobody went there. And then we're like, okay, maybe we just like email people that, hey, we have a new story on the website. And so we literally just pooled all of our like contacts together and started emailing them, hey, you know, this is something we're doing, maybe you want to check it out. And we started sending out these emails, and then we realized, hey, people are actually reading the email. And in the email, we just put the title of the story, and then we linked to the website. And then we, over time, started adding more and more content from the website into the email, because we realized like people are actually reading the email, probably at the time because they were like, oh, we're going to help these guys. But then after a while, we basically just like, okay, people are reading the email, they're not looking at the website, why don't we just take all the content and put it into the email? And that's when we like started this newsletter. It was never that we like sat down and were like, hey, we're going to start a newsletter. And you know, now if you speak with investors or whatever, people are like, oh, why are you not on Snapchat? And it's like, email was so 2006 or whatever. And you're like, yeah, that's one way to look at it. But ultimately, what counts is having that contact and having that like touch point with your end user. It doesn't really matter whether you use text message, email, Snapchat, or whatever. The great thing about email was, which we didn't sort of know, but like figured out then, you know, everybody has an email. You don't need to download an app. You check it every day anyways. Like, it's really, really low barrier to entry. And that's what allowed us to sort of grow very quickly. And we've built this sort of community around this. We have like more than 130,000 people now. We didn't spend any money on marketing. It was all like product-driven growth. We did a lot of user testing. We did a lot of like surveys, like really trying to figure out like, you know, what do people want? And then that has allowed us to sort of build this community. And now we're saying, hey, you know, we have people's attention. From what they're telling us, they really, really like what we're doing. And now let's like start sort of building this new product with them, which we call Finimize My Life, where we try sort of helping people figure out what they should be doing with their personal finances. And we could have sort of skipped all of that, and we probably would have been here with this product, but it probably would have been something that nobody really cares about. And we would have had this thing where it's like, oh, let's go on the street and ask people, do you like this? Let's do some user testing with random people. Now we have a luxury where we can invite people and from our email and be like, hey, do you want to come in? Do you want to start testing with us? And
done the legwork already.
Because we've done the legwork already, and we have that like mind share every single day with these people. So in hindsight, that was like definitely the longer winded route to take, but I think definitely the right one, and is also probably, or at least that's the thesis, the more sustainable one in the long term.
Yeah, it makes sense. You've got real customers, real data,
Yeah.
real users, real data.
Yeah.
What about the sign up or the newsletter? So I met a guy, Scott, who was one of your first writers
Yeah.
about 2 years ago, and I was asking him, we sent out this newsletter. It says at the top, it's a 3-minute read. It's got everything you need to know about today's activity in the markets in America and in Europe. How was that? So how did you get those initial signs? Was it straight into the banking world? Like, did you go by age? Did you go by
No, I mean we kind of just like in the beginning.
So when it rocketed, it went like to 8,000 users, or I can't remember. It's
Yeah.
a short period of time when I saw it.
So I mean, we did this thing where we kind of really followed this one book in the beginning, which I thought was really helpful. It was called Traction by Gabriel Weinberg. And this thing had this thing where this book had this sort of framework called the bullseye framework, which the idea in a nutshell was like the outer ring of a bullseye is like you literally try anything you can imagine, sort of in terms of like reaching users, acquiring users. Then you kind of like really document it, and we have this like somewhere on an Excel still. Really document like, okay, what worked, how much did it cost, what didn't work. So then you kind of like double down on what did work, and then you kind of continue doing that until you have like 3, 4, 5 channels that really, really work. And we did that. And the idea is that if it's very unlikely that you're going to find a growth channel that has worked for other people that will work for you, because they've probably sort of really, really milked the cow, and there's definitely like a first mover advantage. So you're going to find places that nobody else is looking, and that's where you're going to find your users. And so our first couple thousand users were probably friends and family, as is normal. But then the next, like 2000, that was like the very first big hit, was a men's lifestyle blog. And it was literally just about cars, Instagrams, and like totally unrelated to finance. And it said, this, every gentleman should have this newsletter in their inbox. And that was it. And then that gave us overnight 2,000 people. And then and it's kind of like now when I interview growth people and they're like, oh, you should go onto the FT. And it's like, no, like that's exactly where we shouldn't go, because that's sort of the intuitive way. You need to find, like, where is your target user? Where do they hang out? And where is maybe other people aren't looking.
That's not bullseye.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the next thing was pretty standard. We did product hunt. That was kind of, we did the classic thing where one day we were on product hunt and we were notified that we're on product hunt. And then the girl who put us on there was like, yeah, you should probably like write some text and maybe put some images on there. And you know, product hunt is like sort of machinery where people like repair this for like months and weeks and whatever. And we were just on there and we're like, fuck, we need to like now start putting, we didn't even have images. So we created all these images and we literally were there all day like telling people like, hey, check this out, I'll photos. That gave us like another 2,000. And then sort of fast forward, we like tried out all these different things, and then we identified a few channels that worked. Like in the beginning, blogs really worked. Then you see like over time that kind of flattens off, and then you kind of like need to keep digging and finding new growth channels, because you'll probably never find a growth channel that will always work for you. At some stage, there will be like diminishing returns. So now, if we get 2,000 signups, you know, we don't really even notice it. Whereas like back in the day, that would have been like incredible. And so it's just like this constant hustling of finding new channels.
It's amazing. So do you have a target in mind with signups by the end of a certain period, or are you just going with it?
Well, I think fintech is classically, again, something I didn't know when I started, is classically a scale business. And so you need a lot of users. And I think the only company that's ever really hit scale is PayPal in fintech. And maybe there's some other few exceptions. And so I think you really want to get into like the multi-millions, tens of millions in order to build a profitable business.
Okay. So where are you now with products? You've got a few products?
Yeah.
That's good. Get us.
So yeah, we have this email. It's working really well. People really love it. We have, like I said, more than 130,000 people and growing very rapidly. And now we're saying, hey, we help you figure out what's going on within the world of finance. Now let's help you figure out what you should be doing in your own world of finance. And that's where, like I said before, where Finimize My Life comes in. And essentially what Finimize My Life does is within a couple of minutes, we'll help you create your own financial plan. It's all very much in the same style, tone, etc. as the email. And sort of once you've created your plan, we'll help you execute it. Like we'll answer questions that, how much should I be saving? How much should I be investing? Can I afford a house? What kind of a house can I afford? All these questions that sort of most of us have at the back of their heads.
How liable are you with the answers that you're giving?
So our sort of slogan is, we want to empower you to become your own financial advisor. And this is, again, something that came out of like speaking to our users, where we started off by like testing, like, hey, what if we tell you should be doing this? And people said, like, no, I really want to figure out what I should be doing myself. I want to understand it, and I want to understand the why. You know, in the email, we always have like, why should I care? And that's what people like the most. And so on the platform, we help you understand why you should be doing something. And we tell you, this is best practice, this is maybe not so clever, but ultimately you have to make the decision, because the people that we're targeting are smart people. They just haven't really been taught finance. And so it's much more like, we provide you the platform, the tools, the guidance, the best practices. Ultimately, it's your life. Financial planning, financial advice is probably more of an art than a science. So there isn't sort of a right or wrong answer. All that we want to do is sort of guide you through the financial jungle.
Thank you. So how do you break down? So you in your company, team-wise, and different departments, how many are you at the moment? And yeah.
So I think we're now around about 10 people maybe. A lot of them are sitting there. And we are very actively hiring. We're looking to especially hire engineers, some growth people, analytics people. So hopefully by the end of the year we'll be somewhere between 15 to 17 people. And then our idea is to basically launch the product in the UK and then sort of really figure it out here and then start moving into other markets as well with the platform.
I like that, really figure it out.
Yeah.
It's been your motto since the beginning of Dime Deal as well. And then what are you doing now that you wish you had done with Dime Deal, or vice versa, or like, or
so
what are your taking
so
for this company?
Yeah, so I think from day one we really try and focus on the mission. So at Dime Deal we like wrote down our mission like 4 or 5 years in, because it was kind of like, oh, we need a mission, which for an e-commerce company it probably works easier. So like really define the mission. Then we have like very clear sort of, we have a culture manifest, like this is who we want to be, these are the people we want to hire, this is how we want to go about things. Really put it on paper to not risk hiring people that might derail all of that and that might sort of, you might be opportunistic and short sort of sighted, and then build a company where like 2 years down the line you're like, actually I don't like this, I don't even identify with this anymore. So be really clear from day one like what kind of a culture we want to build, and then hire accordingly. So all these people here are like absolute A players. They really believe in the mission. They are super committed, super engaged, and I think that's kind of like what we're hiring for, rather than like, oh shit, we need a programmer tomorrow. Like we take our time. We probably interview more than we should do, just because we don't want to fuck it up, because the first 10 to 14 people typically shape the culture of the company. And if you fuck up there, then there's no way for you to sort of reverse that. There's actually a really good talk on YouTube from, I think, Vinod Khoshla, the founder of Sun Microsystems at Stanford. He's like, if you do that, then some people will think, oh, I can just take out the bad people later on, and then I'll hire the good people. But the reality is that the DNA somehow, I don't know, sort of magically, it just sticks, and you can't remove it. And so I think these like soft factors that when you're young, you don't really realize how important they are. I think that's something that we're like really focusing on. And then, just having a very product-focused business. We don't spend money in marketing. We just want to build stuff that people really like, and then they will tell people about it, and that's how we will grow. So, yeah, I think a lot more of these like soft factors, I think I've realized are a lot more important than people often think.
And where are you planning on attacking next, like geographically? After the UK, do you have a plan for that once you've got it? Stateside, obviously, I think is the big.
Yeah, we definitely want to. We have a lot of our users in America. Yeah. We definitely want to build something up there. We constantly get people. Like today, I had a lady from East Africa. We have a lot of like people from India. Like all over the world, people are like emailing us like, "Hey, can you do this for sort of my country or my region?" So there's like a lot of demand and kind of like a pull. It's just a question of like where do we focus the attention on.
And who's trying to copy you? Is anyone trying to build another newsletter, similar idea?
I mean, there was actually a Wired article about us in the beginning when we started, which was about like the resurgence of newsletters. And I think a lot of them, like you have all these sort of big publications that are starting them. But I think something that's again a soft factor is that's not that easy to copy is like the style, the tone, the voice. And so we haven't really seen any, but we certainly see sort of, the more traditional players moving into the space. But
I suppose the luxury for you now is that you don't have to feel rushed to get to somewhere, and try and be this machine in this business you don't have to be. Or
I mean, like 130,000 people it sounds like a decent amount, but like in the grand scheme of things, isn't that much.
There's no one on your tail sort of coming up behind you right now. So
no, I mean, not that we see. Maybe that's like the most dangerous position to be in, but no, not that we see, no.
Yeah, and also it lets you evolve, right? Space to think, space to really work stuff out and get it right. It's like these guys who run the Wagon, the coding school at Wagon, they're 4 years old, they haven't raised any investment, and they just take bit by bit by bit, and purposefully, slowly grow and slowly get everything right.
And I think you're seeing more of these, again, that was, and that's kind of, again, what I was thinking, like these sort of more product-driven companies that are really cool because they often focus a lot more on the engagement metrics than on just pure growth. And I think a company that does that really well, or has until now, was Snapchat. So they were like, we don't really care that much about growth. We care much more about the engagement metrics. If the engagement metrics are good, everything else will follow. Hopefully that will continue, but it's this whole thing of like build something that people really love, rather than like maybe 10 people really love versus like 100 people kind of love. And I think then that can then scale up a lot better.
Yeah, makes sense as well. Yeah. I've done somewhat of a mediocre job of this interview, forgot the name of Dime Deal, but I'm going to hand over to you guys. I've done my bit. Thank you so much for answering my questions and everything. But look, guys, please feel free. Who's got questions for Max?
Are you?
Yeah, I'm going to moderate. I'll moderate this. You.
Where do you see ultimately your earnings coming from?
Yeah. So we'll figure it out now. Okay. We have a couple of sort of revenue streams that we're planning on integrating into the actual app. We could be very tempted to do advertising, but we feel like that would compromise the product for now at least. And so when we build the financial plan, we want to be in a position on the one hand to help you sort of stay on track and like make it more sophisticated, make it more powerful. And then we are exploring ways for you to pay us a small fee on a recurring basis to get access to that. And on the second sort of stream, if we're able to pair you with a good financial product or the right savings account or whatever it is, then some of these products might give us a success fee. And then there's quite a few other things that we could be doing. Again, we are trying to like really narrow it down for now.
How did the Wagon play into creating your idea concept that you were at?
I didn't hear the first part.
How did the Wagon play into it?
Nothing. We just run these events. We've asked Max to come.
And they give beers.
But as far as you're all concerned, we built the whole thing.
We outsourced it to them.
Yeah, we've got loads of developers for you. Sorry. Right. Yeah.
You spoke a lot about sort of hiring the right people and how you have the right people around you. So in the previous company, are there any elements that stand out to you, particularly when you're interviewing someone? Like I said, it was the growth person when they all spoke about the FT was a bit of a red flag. Are there any things that stand out to you, particularly as impressive?
I think something that I personally really value, and I think that's like really important, is kind of like two things. One is just sort of a basic, or like not a basic, but like a raw level of intelligence. Because, or actually, sorry, let me just explain both, and then I'll say why. Raw level of intelligence, ideally like very intelligent, and then this sort of hustler sort of instinct or spirit. Because if you combine the two, that means you have somebody who's like really, really smart and who will figure it out, as I've been referring to. And if you have somebody who's just really smart and isn't willing to sort of try things out and get your hands a bit dirty, then you're kind of going to die in vanity or like of indecision or whatever. And so like finding a combination of the two, I think, is like invaluable. We made the experience at my old company. In the end, we hired like really, really senior people. They were like super expensive. And most of them we actually ended up firing again. Because they were like really good on paper, but they weren't like very good when it came to actually sort of doing stuff. And we found that actually if you have people who are maybe a bit more junior, but who have that like ambition level and who have that drive, then oftentimes that will like yield way better results. Because at the end of the day, like there are a lot of exceptions, but like typically business is just a lot of common sense. And sometimes you have too much experience, or if you're even too smart, then you lose that common sense. I gave the example of the warehouse. Like I'd never been to a warehouse. I thought it was the most boring thing in the world. At the end of the day, the devil's in the detail, but it's not really that difficult. It's like how can you make sure that people deliver the goods to where you want to be, which sounds really sort of straightforward, but like you'll find they just come a week later than they said they would. Like where do you shelf the products? How do you make sure that they get delivered to the right person? It's kind of like, if you take a step back, like obviously that's what a warehouse should do. You don't need like a rocket scientist to help you figure that out. So just like sit down, figure it out. And then, once you have everything in place, then you can start getting in like experts who like, okay, here we can like optimize this by like 5% and here like by 3% and whatever. But a lot of it, I think, is just pure common sense and just sort of acknowledging that. Yeah.
I'm sure you appreciate obviously working in the industry that you guys are targeting, of course, the financial services industry. A lot of it is sort of data-driven, I'm sure you can imagine. How do you kind of disrupt the market, taking over the likes of Bloomberg, Reuters, FT? How do you find you sort of compete against those guys? What are you guys going to do differently? Because you appreciate you don't come from a financial background, right? Very strong financial background. How do you get people to buy into you? How do you kind of disrupt the market from that perspective?
You mean for the financial news part?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for us, like the financial news is a, like I said, is a really good way to build up an audience and a community and like have that daily conversation with these people. We like didn't set out to sort of disrupt the financial news industry. We are much more like, we don't really focus that much on competitors either. We like really just focus on like, how can we solve this problem to help people figure out what they should be doing with their savings or with their money in general. And anything that takes, we'll do. And whether the EFT or whoever else you referenced will move in the similar direction. At the end of the day, if you're like super focused on the problem, then that means you'll have the better product. And then, you know, the FT as the example, not to pick on them, but that's the example you mentioned, you know, they do have a newsletter already. And yeah, tot.
Yeah, would you ever take the on yourselves in order to actually execute those the advice that you give? Would you actually execute that sort of that financial advice that you've been given? Say somebody had their savings,
Yeah.
would you actually take that money, that revenue, and actually trade it for it?
not for now, no. So we kind of said like there are a lot of platforms and companies out there that like do that really, really well. I think the challenge that we're trying to solve, at least for now, is helping you figure out which ones of those you should choose, because there's like such a jungle out there. I mean, if you go on one of these price comparison websites and you look for a savings account, you'll figure out there's like a million different types of savings accounts, and then there's like even more providers of savings accounts, and you could probably stay like a million years on that website to figure it out. And there must be a more efficient way for you to do that, and I think that's sort of the first step for us. We currently don't think that we could do a better job of investing money on your behalf or saving money on your behalf. Like, there's a lot of people out there who do that really well.
Sticking with the competitive competition landscape theme, where do you sort of see Finimize, especially advice, Finimize Life and app compared to more of your chatbot advisor type of products that are coming out from Microsoft?
So where do we see, just because the acoustics aren't direct, so where do we see us versus chatbots advisory thing? Yeah. So I think that, you know, again, we don't really think about it that much. I think two things. One is, or actually it's just one thing really. Our users really want to be empowered. Like that's just kind of what they have the urge for. They want to understand. They kind of don't want to trust a black box that tells you, oh, you should be doing this now with your money, because you're like inherently a bit suspicious. Like, okay, how does it actually know I should be doing that? I worked really hard for this money. I don't really feel comfortable giving you that. What they want to have is like somebody kind of like guide them through it, help them understand it, help them understand what are the consequences, what are the trade-offs, and make it really, really easy then to go and do it. We don't think that a chatbot or whatever, like that's kind of an interface. We've decided that we want to build a platform that makes it easier for you to understand and for you to feel empowered. We don't think that's the best. The chatbot, currently at least, is not the best interface for that. But at the end of the day, that's just an interface, right? And I think really what we're trying to do is do a holistic platform that really helps you from sort of A to Z. And there's nothing really out there that is doing that as of yet.
So it's kind of meshing together the education with advice, or actually prioritizing the education.
Exactly, yeah. Both, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You raised some money with passion capital. Can you talk a bit about why did you choose them and a bit about that?
Yeah, so so there was a couple of things. So when I was from day one, I was like, at the beginning of the company, I want to have operational investors. I don't want to have like financial investors. I think those will be a lot more value add later down the route or later down the company. there's a huge debate about like, do VCs need to be operational or in from background or not. I personally think for the beginning it's better because they kind of been through the struggle. And then, you know, if you look at sort of the VC landscape in that stage in the UK or in Europe, there aren't really that many players or VCs where you would say like, hey, these guys are like world class. And so then I started speaking with a lot of people here in the scene, and I was like, who, you know, for some reason, like all the entrepreneurs were like, they're just really good guys. Like if you get them on board, they're just like cool guys. Like they will be helpful if you need them, but they won't annoy you, and they kind of like get what's important. They're not going to bug you with a lot of reporting or whatever. And it was just like probably the one VC at that stage of the sort of fundraising cycle where literally no entrepreneur said a negative thing, and that was a very strong signal. And also, like the thing that every VC likes to do is play these stupid games, and they didn't do that. Where it's like you don't hear from them, then you know, oh, you need a term sheet first or whatever. You know, they were just super straightforward. Like, yeah, let's do this, and then that was it.
It's quite rare.
Wow.
Yeah. Just, you talked a lot about the sort of pain you were experiencing in late 20s, Switzerland. I've got some savings, how do I invest in them?
Yeah.
I'm speaking to intelligent bankers who are my age as well, and actually they have no clue either. When you started this project, how did you go about, in the early stages especially, thinking, gathering that intelligent resource, creating it yourself? You talked about going into different industries with no clue. How did you suddenly go from no idea to some idea to product? I'm just interested in that.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, so the beauty of having started with this news product was that it was not technical at all. So I did, in the beginning, like way in the beginning, I did all of the technical stuff because there's like so many tools out there that you can use. And then I kind of just reached out on Facebook to people who were like, hey, who knows finance? And there were like 5 people. I mean, that's also the thing, like everybody then raises their hand, but like when you really start doing it, like very few people actually get it. And so that like very quickly became clear. You know, you mentioned Scott. He was the person who sort of then crystallized to become like the best person out of that. And now we have like a range of people who help with the content. You know, ranging from people who have more of a journalistic background all the way to, you know, we just hired an ex-Goldman trader who's doing this with us. So I think in the beginning it was really more like finding the right people, often through sort of personal references and personal connection, and kind of just being lucky as well. Because the challenge with these people is they get paid so much money that to join a startup where they're probably not going to get paid anything in the very early stages. You kind of just hit them at the right time when they're already up for something new, and they're sort of in that frame of mind. But again, it came down to people.
Two questions. When are you planning actually to launch Finimize live? I've been on the access list, I know it's like on the waiting list now, but when are you actually planning to have it live?
Yeah.
The second question, are you planning to have the product actually regulated at some point so that you can actually like drive advice and not just guidance?
So in terms of the launch date, so we're not communicating anything because we're taking kind of like an iterative approach. So the product is live. There are people using it, and we're kind of like letting batches on at the moment, and we are identifying what do they like and what do they don't like, and then we kind of try and fix what they don't like, and then let on the next batch. We have now some more than 25,000 people on the wait list, so we have a few to get through. Hopefully, sort of as we go over time, we can let on larger batches, and then at some stage open up. But we haven't sort of set ourselves this like big bang launch date. I think usually those don't really go that well. And then in terms of like the regulation point, will be very much driven by what the users want. So if they want us to go much more deeper, then we'll go down the regulated path. If they feel like that's not something that they need in order to feel comfortable and informed, then we might not do it. We're open to it. We're not afraid of it, but we're just going to let ourselves be guided by user demand again.
Any more questions? All right.
Yeah.
Is it more looking from a marketer's money supermarket point of view, where it's not geared towards very technical stuff, but it's just more trying to make people more confident with money? What's the sort of balance?
Between like getting super technical in terms of like finance versus.
Quite a broad thing. I mean, scariness is what puts off a lot of people with finance.
Yeah, so I think in the very first instance, we want to take away that scariness, and that we can do through information, through transparency, and through education. And then, again, like how deep and how technical we want to get really depends on our users. What we find is that some people are like super technical, and then some people who are like super basic. And we have a very clear sort of target user that we're building for in the beginning, at least. And so we're going to sort of along the spectrum of like basic to technical, we're going to pinpoint there at the beginning. But I think ultimately what we find is that everybody wants to delve into the really technical, kind of sexy, I'm stock picking or whatever. But what you'll find is that most people actually haven't covered their basics. So it's actually not that black and white. So we're probably going to end up doing both, is the short answer. Doing the basics and the more technical stuff. But also I think, so just like two things on that come to mind. One is we kind of just very much embrace the fact that finance is pretty dry, and it's just not that fun. And I think if you embrace that and you don't expect people from one day to the next to be like, oh my God, finance is like the new, I don't know, American football Super Bowl, then you start building the product around that. And so like the example of, we just expect you to give us 3 minutes every day. We don't want you to give us 5 minutes. That's probably not that interesting for 5 minutes. Just give us 3 minutes, that's enough. And then the second point being, my favorite anecdote is one of our users. He studied PPE in Oxford, worked at Bain Consulting, did an MBA at Stanford, and he told us like, hey, I can build you the most complex financial model in the world for like a Fortune 500 company, but I can't build myself a basic financial plan. And that's where the paradox comes about, right?
One last question for me. You spoke about expansion internationally.
Yeah.
Do you think your content is market specific, or do you think it's relevant across the board?
So currently our content has 3 different sort of regions. One is global, and then that's, as it says, global, then American and European, with probably more of a focus on the UK than continental Europe. And that's for us currently the focus. Like I said, we have a lot of demand from other regions, but we currently just don't have the resources to do it, and it's not really our strategic priority at the moment.
Do you think the way you write that content, because the users will obviously perceive words in different ways, does that play into your writing at all?
I mean, so maybe that's the last thing, and then we'll let you go. But we kind of always imagine a user sort of standing at the subway or at the tube, headphones in, kind of like 50% attention span. And if there's one thing that you don't understand, like you're out. That's how we write, because that's how I consume anything as well. Like if you lose me, then I'll go back to Instagram or whatever I'm doing. That's just the reality. Again, we're embracing the fact that that's the reality. And then what we find is it's kind of interesting. We have anybody from like students who are like 12 in school, all the way to like the most senior people on Wall Street reading us every day. The funny anecdote that I can close with is we had a huge fuss on a Friday night. This guy, this analyst from New York, Wall Street, calls us up. He's like, hey, my boss wants to speak to you. And then I was like, okay, what does he want to speak about? I don't know, he just really wants to speak to you. So then we set up this call, boss doesn't show up, the analyst like freaks out, he can't find his boss, he's like, oh, he disappeared. We then reschedule later on in the night, and then this guy comes on. He started his own hedge fund. He's been in the hedge fund business for 25 years. He told us. He got on. He's like, hey, I manage $5 billion in assets. I have access to all the financial information in the world. I've been doing this for 25 years, as I said, and I have never seen anything like the content that you produce. I read it every single day. I just wanted to tell you that. Bye. That was it. So reach everybody.
Yeah, we'll close up there, but I mean that's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure I've no doubt we'll be using Finimize in a few years' time. This is great.
Yeah.
You're going to Finimize our lives big time.
Exactly.
No, but thank
That's
you
the
so
spirit.
much, Max, for giving up his evening. He's come here. I'm sure he's got probably more important things to do than listen to my stupid questions. But thank you so much. Hopefully see you back another time.
Yeah, love to.
Hang around. We've got some beers here, guys. So thank you.